Hey, good Wednesday evening to everybody. How are you? It is good to see you. It is good to be seen by you. I am the one and only Bill Sylvie, aka the Dungeon Delver, coming to you live from an undisclosed location. And I hope you're having an absolutely fantastic hump day. So if you're out there and you're like, hey, Kyle's going to be coming on in a minute, and you didn't see in the chat, and you didn't catch everyone on Twitter. Literally last minute, Kyle got called away. It's family stuff, and we get that around here, right? You know, family stuff is important. Their scheduling, like scheduling, things can just go off the rails sometimes, and we absolutely adore Kyle, and hopefully he'll be back. In memoriam for Diamond, she was 17 years old. She was a good girl and will be missed. That is a wonderful sentiment, Vaughn. Dick Cheney's basement, not quite. Remember Dick Cheney before he dicks you. But anyway, thank you, Vaughn. I'll definitely need the super after that. But yeah, so I mean, for example, guys, I'm just not going to have time to have the Black Crows on this week. I know, right? I'm too busy. I already have better guests tomorrow. I've got Heidi and Eric coming on tomorrow. And then Friday, we're playing Gamma World. How am I supposed to fit that in? And one little scheduling update. So Nerd Council of Doom is still happening Saturday. It is Saturday at 7 in the evening. That's myself, Yang Yan Zhao, and of course, Dungeon Minister. We'll all be over on, I think we'll be over on Yang's channel. And so, yeah, we'll be doing that. We'll be talking about all the hot nerd news and all the cool stuff that's going to be going on. We'll have that information for you. So please do tune in, and I'll have the links coming shortly for that. But anyway, yeah. So like I said, scheduling stuff happens. And fortunately tonight, though, I have a guest coming on the show. Good guy. You know him. You've talked to him. He hangs around the Discord sometimes. And we did a short video this morning about games as a service, which is kind of a hot button topic, which we may get into that a little bit on the live stream, but I think we have some interesting topics to cover. So I'm going to stop babbling then and don my headphones and bid welcome to tonight's guest. He is a scientist, a gamer, and a burgeoning YouTube personality. So be sure to throw him a subscribe here on the tubes. Everybody put your hands together for the one and only Tim Imholt. Tim, how the hell are you?
Oh, you know, I'd complain, but nobody listens when I do.
I feel you 100%, man. Thank you for the last minute the last minute join. Because I thought, you know, I'll go on and I'll dick around, I'll do whatever. But then I thought, because that news today, that news dropped literally, like I got up, walked over, sat down at my desk, popped open Twitter to see the link to your video, and there's a Cynthia Williams out at Wizards of the Coast.
And I did a little more research after that came out, and because they're public, because Hasbro's publicly traded, they had to go file a bunch of stuff with the SEC. They've known this was coming. This was not like, oh, this morning she just walked in, right? This was something that happened days or weeks ago, right? So they kept the lid on it. I got to give them credit for that. But
yeah, that's a first. Yeah. I guess finally, after a year of everybody finding out their dirty laundry weeks in advance, you know, they finally managed to plug some leaks. But and it's as you said, and I think, you know, we all kind of observe this, that corporations don't spin on a dime. I mean, I made the joke about, you know, it's just a square with my name in it. even I take time to do stuff if I decide to do stuff, you know? So you talk about a company like Hasbro with a $7.09 billion market cap. This was not a, well, I'm putting my 2 weeks notice today, guys.
No, there were meetings and legal teams and memos and stuff to the SEC and research. This was not new. And when they say, "Oh, we're going to conduct a search," they've already started that search. They probably got a short list of names already, on who's going to take her place.
Now, one thing that I posited, and I would like to hear your take on this. Do you see a potentiality for Chris Cox to wear two hats?
No. You have to think of two things. Number one, he's already way up here, right? And basically he'd be taking the place of one of his division presidents, because he's already got the company chopped into pieces, right? So he's got people who run different parts of it, and this was just one of the parts. He's not going to come down and do both jobs at once. It's too, I don't want to say it's beneath him, but it's kind of beneath him. And the other problem is Wizards of the Coast has other investors besides Hasbro. They're not the only shareholder in it, although they are like 90-something% of it or whatever. But there are others, and he's not going to want to be on the short list of people they call when they get mad about something, right? There's going to have to be somebody that they go through.
Granted, I wouldn't want to have to sit in a room with Larry Fink of BlackRock ESG either, but we can have that discussion another time. So now, now we kind of got to take this apart, because, I did my video read. I wanted to get the news out to people as quickly as possible. This is a, oh boy. I mean, there's a lot of dissection here. We could be here for a bit. You might want to top that coffee or whatever.
I did just before the show. So yeah, it is coffee. It's not whatever. Okay.
No whatever tonight. I feel like I should have some whatever, but I don't have any good whatever. But to move on. Let's take the 10,000 foot view first and just run down some bullet points, and then we'll come back and look at the details. First point, quit or fired?
I honestly, the more I look at it, the more I think quit. Because if you go back through the last year or so of Hasbro quarterly statements, and I think I've looked at all of them. I know you've dug into a couple of them. They've been saying nothing but good things about Wizards of the Coast. And before anybody gets mad, I want to clarify what that means. From a corporate perspective, Wizards of the Coast has been doing relatively well, because they've seen growth in Magic the Gathering. They've seen growth in Dungeons and Dragons. Growth is what you want at a company. And remember, Magic, everybody, a lot of times people will kind of get, wrapped around the axle, because we all play Dungeons and Dragons. That's what we think of first. But Magic is 10x the size of D&D, right? So really,
really is, yeah.
That's their bread and butter, right? D&D is this thing over here that we kind of deal with when we have to, and Magic is what keeps the lights on. But it, so I think from a corporate perspective, she was very successful. The gamers would have a completely different opinion of that. The OGL stuff, all that, we'd all have a completely different opinion. But from a company perspective, she did well. I think she got a much better offer. And she's about to announce that she's going someplace else for, I think she was making $6 million or something, 6.6. I saw someplace. I think she got an offer for like 10 or 12 and was like, all right, I'm out. Got to go follow the cash. Because Hasbro has not been mad at Wizards of the Coast. The one sort of ickiness they had from a corporate perspective, forget PR, forget OGL for a second, was the movie. Didn't do quite as well as they'd hoped, but COVID really kind of screwed up movies in a way that nobody anticipated. And if I remember reading correctly, production of Dungeons and Dragons was pre-COVID or something. I mean, it's been going on for a while.
Yeah, it started a ways back. Yeah,
and it got sit on a shelf. So for them to come close to breaking even, I think was probably internally in the company classified as a win, even though, we all looked at it and said it's a loss, right? Because it was technically a loss. But I think it could have been much, much, much worse was probably how they spun it internally. And if you look at the growth of D&D and the growth of Magic, I think she was declared, victorious. And I think one of the other things that gets missed quite often is, yes, there was growth in Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, there was growth in Magic, but COVID forced a lot of things to change really fast, right? Our entertainment world shrunk, and people kind of got back involved in some of these things because you couldn't go out, couldn't go to concerts, couldn't go to a football game, couldn't go out and watch a movie. You were at home.
Right.
And people, reawakened a lot of Dungeons and Dragons groups that hadn't played together in years, and all of a sudden they're playing together again. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where some of that growth came from. And I think she took credit for it. Now she's going to go cash out someplace else. The big question comes, who's on that short list?
So then we'll again stick a pin in that and come back to it. I have seen this before in the corporate world where someone will come into a company, do some stuff with that company, leave that company to go back to a previous company, but then there's this sort of organic extension to back or over to company B. They started at company A, went to company B, left, and then came back to company A. But by extension, because they now have their hooks in company B, we see an absorption of company B, at least partial, by company A. So this then brings up a couple of two-part questions. Do you see her going back to Microsoft? And if so, would you think that would see Microsoft going after D&D from an IP mining standpoint?
I don't think Microsoft would do that. They're not really a company who would try to get that deep into the entertainment industry or into the gaming industry. So I think it's just sort of one of those things where they'd have to grow a whole group that does stuff Microsoft doesn't currently do. Right? They're not designing tabletop games. They're not working with card games. They're not, even if they did try to get, because I don't think Wizards of the Coast would ever separate D&D and Magic. I think Wizards of the Coast is Wizards of the Coast, and it's not going to separate out one piece of IP or another. I think it has what it wants, and it's not going to let go. So trying to spin Dungeons and Dragons out, I don't necessarily think that they would do, and I don't think Microsoft would buy the whole thing because they're not going to manufacture cards. Right? They're just not going to get in that business space. And I think it's too small for them to care about because they're huge from a market cap. It's like barely a needle mover. I can see, and this is, you just made me kind of hit my head when you were asking about that. AI is so hot right now. I can see her wandering off across from Renton down to Silicon Valley and working with one of the growing AI companies that is a Microsoft acquisition target. I could see that kind of thing going on pretty easily because there's a lot of AI companies that are in kind of the gaming space. So I could see that, but I don't think Microsoft has any interest in Dungeons and Dragons.
The only reason I soft disagree with you on that is back in the late 90s when FASA, which was the big company, of course, they had BattleTech and some other IPs. One of them that they had was a sort of a diesel punk lightweight flight simulator thing called Crimson Skies.
Remember?
Which was so Crimson, but Microsoft got a chunk of FASA to do not just Crimson Skies but Mech Warrior. So I do wonder if perhaps that would be on the radar, but I think we're getting a little too speculative there, talking about what Microsoft might or might not do. This is what Cynthia is going to do and what her departure heralds.
Now I can see her going back to Microsoft and partnering with Wizards on taking the place of Larian Studios. I can see something like that, right?
That now, you know what, that might that makes sense. I mean, because they got Bethesda. Bethesda is part, ZeniMax. That's all Microsoft now. I mean, that could be, come on, let's be 100% honest. Bill Gates somewhere stuck in a drawer or a box somewhere has a character sheet and some funny dice. He does. You know the man has to.
He's too big a nerd not to.
Right, exactly. So I cannot help but think, I mean, Bethesda has kind of painted themselves in the corner. I mean, Starfield, by all accounts, was a bit of a flop, and they're getting kind of a renaissance, an uptick from the success of Fallout, which by all accounts, like I'm seeing it from all corners, from guys like out on the no bullshit, keep your ESG at home guys like Critical Drinker, all the way on the other side of the arena are talking about how good the Fallout TV show is, and I certainly want to sit down and binge it here before too much longer. But still, I think, I mean, Microsoft has the tool set now to do a Dungeons and Dragons game if she did make that move. If she did kind of come in and say, all right, guys, let's build some bridges here.
And they've got the cash. So let's say Wizards wants to do something other than Baldur's Gate. They want to go in a new direction, which I think would be silly because they got a player base, but hear me out for a second. To develop a new video game in the current market space, because I've actually looked into it as part of my day job, it's $100 million. Developing a new game and getting it on the market ready to play is somewhere between 75 and 100 to $125 million, depending on what you're doing. Microsoft has that kind of cash like in couch cushions. Right? I mean, yeah. So if you really wanted to do it, they could. I honestly don't know. I don't think she left on bad terms, because you don't get a job the size and the salary of hers if you leave a company on bad terms.
Yeah.
Especially one that has SEC stuff involved in it, because SEC digs into everything. And no company that's as risk averse as Hasbro would put somebody in there that had questions. At least not at that kind of level where they actually have to be showing up as an insider on the insider stock report. All right,
yeah.
So it, I can't imagine she left on bad terms. But who knows? But it just the fact that she came over as sort of a, hey, we got to tell the SEC what you're doing all the time. That seems like it would be very difficult to do. And Michael, you're exactly right. I will say this about Fallout. I rarely watch all of a TV show quickly because I'm just kind of busy with reading and my day job and 3 kids and whatever else. I watched that show in 2 days. I couldn't look away. I just could not stop. It was that good. And I rarely ever played that video game. I turned it on. I just couldn't look away. I was like, what the hell is this?
That is a ringing endorsement. I definitely got to check it out then. So, so we see some potentialities there, but so if she left under her own power, I do kind of find that curious, because if we could talk about the pen and paper, kind of step down into the gross gamer basement for a second and talk about the pen and paper. It is a huge feather in one's cap to be at Wizards of the Coast, or back in the day at TSR, and to usher in a new version, a new iteration of Dungeons and Dragons, to say, I was there when the cool new came out. Because there's always porpoising, Tim. There's always an edition starts to go down. As editions get older, they get moribund, they get long in the tooth, and they start to dip under their own weight. And then when a new one comes out, you see this uptick of popularity. You see an intake of new gamers, and no matter how much that may level off, you do kind of see that uptick. So why leave on literally the eve of that happening?
I have a theory, and it's a working theory, but remember, I'm a physicist, so I'm allowed to have theories. Sure. One of the things I think that caused a giant lift in Dungeons and Dragons sales, among other things. It was kind of the perfect storm, right? You had COVID, you had all the other things going on. But one of the things I think that brought younger players in, and remember, companies live, breathe, and eat on younger players, because old people like Bill and me, I got all the crap I really need in my life, right? So I could play, for the rest of my life and probably never go through every adventure I already own on a second pass or something. And if I did, I'd just go find one I haven't run in a while, and I'd be fine with it. So they're really looking for young blood, right? And I think one of the things that really brought young blood in was Stranger Things. It just has to have been part of that equation. And if you look at the release date and what was going to be the release date of the next series, the final season of Needful Things or Stranger Things. Needful Things is Stephen King book. Stranger Things is the show. Sorry about that.
Very different tonally.
Very different tone. But they were pretty close together. I think the new edition was coming out slightly before it, but the writer strike screwed that up, right, and pushed Stranger Things off. So part of me is thinking maybe she had an offer. Maybe she knows that the sales projections for the new edition aren't going to be as good because you don't have the Stranger Things support, and you're not going to get it till mid next year or something. So I don't know. Maybe she's getting out while the getting's good. Maybe she had an offer. Maybe she's, who knows? It could be any number of things. But I think the new edition, I think part of it was, there's this sort of internally when you kick out these new versions of something, you have to go through this little sales projection exercise, which, by the way, is the biggest wag or wild something guess ever.
I've gotten a super tonight. You can say
it's absolutely the biggest wild ass guess ever when you put those sales projections together. They are never accurate. They're usually within about 25% at best. So I think part of it is, I know Stranger Things, they were playing first edition, Michael. I know, but my kids don't differentiate that, and they just want to go to the store and get the latest one. And if I'm not somebody who played and somebody else who never played has a kid who saw it, they're just going to go to the store and buy it, right? They're not going to say first edition, fifth. They're not going to notice that difference. But anyway, back to my thought. I think that wild ass guess is about to be all completely wrong because you don't have that Stranger Things support that's out there. And I know it was first edition versus fifth, but the typical parent who never played as a kid is not going to know that, and they're just going to go to the nearest store or the website and buy whatever's the latest one, right? So, and my kids, honestly, and Bill, you and I have talked about this. I have a certain love for first edition. And first, second, third are kind of fuzzy line in between them all, but it somewhere in the first-ish edition, is sort of what I love. And I've played fifth, but my kids kind of prefer the artwork that's in the fifth. I prefer the first, but they grew up in a different time than I did, so they're used to seeing that kind of stuff. So, they want the youth audience, and I don't blame them. If they're a company, you got to have new sales, and I'm not buying nearly as much as kids would. Online gaming streams, Critical Role. I honestly don't know enough about the Critical Role situation to really talk about it. You guys probably all know 10 times more about that than I do. But
it's kayfabe.
Yeah. Dimension 20, I don't know enough about that. But the other thing I think that's going to become huge, and maybe she's leaving to do part of this, and Microsoft could also do this one, is the virtual tabletop that Wizards of the Coast has put out sucks. Right. It's not great. And Microsoft, that's what they do. It's software, right? So she could go back over there and fix the VTT problem that Wizards has had, and maybe work on a version of, I'm not a Magic player, but maybe work on a version of Magic that actually is online, which is where they want to go anyway, because the margins are better.
Yeah. I mean, and it could be any or all of those things, but let's come back around to the short list. Now, I don't know enough about the guts of Wizards of the Coast. Ask me who might have taken over if Gary had left prior to 1985 in TSR, and I could sit here until dawn tomorrow telling you about the various people who I personally know that worked at TSR back in the day. But the current group, I know nothing about. So let's talk a little bit about the short list, though, Tim.
Names I'm not sure I could give you, but let's think skill set for a minute, right? Okay. So it's Wizards. Remember, we're not just talking Dungeons and Dragons. It's Wizards, and Wizards produces a lot of physical things, whether that's Magic the Gathering card and whether it's books. And I know somebody's going to say in a minute, yeah, but they just fired the whole book staff. We'll get back to that in a minute. But they manufacture playing cards, and they print other things. They build stuff. You're going to have somebody who has a strong engineering background, but you're also going to have somebody who understands technology, because they're not giving up on the software side at all. And maybe that's why maybe if she does go back to Microsoft, maybe that's why she'd be a good partner. But you're going to have somebody who has a lot of manufacturing background, somebody who has a strong business background. Somebody brought up on my Twitter feed, Lockheed Martin has this interesting approach where they have sort of dual presidents or dual leadership. There's sort of this co-equal branch of leadership where there's an executive who has the financial background and the creative engineer who has the engineering background that sort of get an equal vote. And it would be interesting if they had a creative and a business person like co-presidents. That would be kind of a really cool way to. It's like Lockheed Martin has done it forever. And it would be interesting to see, them do something like that. Because it really is a creative company, and creative types don't typically have a business experience, and business people don't necessarily care what the creatives have to say. So it'd be nice to see sort of let's get that going across. Now, the book thing, somebody's about to fry me on, I'm sure. I know they did fire their whole book staff. I've written 7 books in my adult life, and I can tell you that 65-1 sales are electronic versus print. Dungeons and Dragons players prefer print. I prefer print. My house has 1,200 plus books in it and 3 shelves full of Dungeons and Dragons stuff. Electronic sales are the way it's going to go when Gen X and whatnot kind of move out. It's going electronic. And even I read my Kindle quite often because I can adjust the font size and take my glasses off. That's becoming more important as I get older. I think, drive-through may see an uptick of old versions, and I think that electronic side is not going away. I think print books are going to be there, but I think they're going to be much more smaller print runs. I think everything is going to become electronic, and it's just the way it is. And even I have 2 or 3 Kindles running around because I could put 10 to 15 books on here, and I can keyword search it where instead of flipping through pages, and it just makes it a lot faster. Now, that being said, I've got a whole bunch of this kind of stuff laying around too. So, take your pick, right? It is what it is.
Right.
But my kids, man, they'd much rather have their Kindle in a electronic version. And, I've got a kid who's starting high school next year. So it's just the market.
My oldest, I was telling her how good Chris Claremont's 75 to 9. Gosh, was it 75 to 91? Yeah. Mm-hmm. How good Claremont's run through X-Men was. And I said, there are actually, you can buy PDFs of the comics. We could just buy a collection of those comics, and you could read them on your tablet. And she's like, I hate reading comics on my tablet, Dad. I want to hold them in my hand. And I was like, that's my girl.
And comics, I get that. And even some of the reference material, my kids would much rather hold the monster manual than look at the monster manual, right? But, there's other things they'd much rather go the other way. So it's different for everybody. Some people like the print version. Some people prefer electronic. If you travel a lot, and when I used to travel for work a lot, I used to spend 2 out of 3 weeks off someplace. I'm not going to carry 12 books with me, but I can get a new one on my Kindle in 30 seconds, right? So it sort of depends on how you live and how you work. And the one thing I hope they don't do, and you and I talked about this earlier, I hope they do not make this new version a subscription service. And Michael, you're right. There's been studies about that too. You retain things differently when you read it off a screen versus on paper. It's not necessarily better. It's just different. And everybody's different, right? So I retain things one way, somebody else retains things another way. It just really depends on who it is. But I think as long as they don't try to go to some subscription service, because that would make me really upset. Because if I buy an edition of Dungeons and Dragons and I look up what an owlbear is, which kicked my tushy last night, I'm still hurting because of that hug. I don't want that to change, right? I want it to kind of be the same. It's like, oh, we've decided owlbears were too tough. We're going to make them easier. and the subscription service can screw that up. So I'm hoping that they don't do that kind of thing.
Yeah, 100%. We did talk about this today. I do not look. I know exactly where it says, where the first instance of a non-human vampire is in D&D, and they can't change that. I know that drow are chaotic evil. I know that Mordenkainen has a full luxurious head of hair, and he's not bald. He doesn't look like Antone Zandor LaVey. And Wizards of the Coast can't change that. They cannot retcon my books. So I can just say, well, I don't care. But one thing I will say, my fear for new players, and Tim and I talked about this a little bit today on the video over on his channel. You should definitely check it out. Subscribe to him on YouTube if you're not already subscribed. But I don't want to see DMs being gaslit by players, or players gaslit by DMs. Okay, Friday night comes out and you've got, X rules are in place and X classes are set up, and then your player comes to the game on Monday and says, oh, hey, my bard now can do this, this, and this. And you're like, no, bro, I got a dungeon master's guide and that's not true. Okay, well, let's look it up. And then suddenly your electronic dungeon master's guide has been updated and changed. There's something creepily Orwellian about that. And I don't want that for tabletop games. That's not what tabletop games are supposed to be. I think when gamers settle on a set of rules, look, I know people, I'm friends with people who will tell me straight-faced, they're not kidding, original Dungeons and Dragons, 3 booklets, that's it. That's the only true form of D&D, and that's the only D&D they'll play. And God bless them. If that's what they like, that's absolutely fine. TSR never demanded that these people have a subscription to the Strategic Review. They never demanded that they buy Supplement 1 Greyhawk, Supplement 2 Blackmoor, Supplement 3 Eldritch Wizardry, and on and on and on and on. There was no forced march of upgrades from TSR. It says in OD&D, why should we do your thinking for you? A model where they turn a tabletop game into software as a service is, quite frankly, exceptionally distasteful to me.
So I did a video on my channel the other day with Richard Witters, who I know you've talked to. He's been on your channel.
Yes.
And for people who don't know, Richard has been an artist. He's an artist who has worked on Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, and he worked for Larian Studios. And we were talking about the corporate culture between all those, and I just loaded it a couple of days ago, so it's over on my channel if you want to see it. But he brought up an interesting point, and working at the level he worked at inside Wizards of the Coast, he was in meetings outside of just artwork, right? Because when you work at a company, you hear about stuff that's not directly related to your job. You just kind of hallway conversations, you find stuff out. And one of the things that he talked about was their struggle with the virtual tabletop gaming, virtual tabletop version. And I know I'd much rather sit around a table and play with my friends just like everybody else would, but that's not the world we all live in, because people move, people have to be on someplace else. You just can't get together. So if you want to have a regular tempo, having a virtual tabletop is sometimes easier. But he brought up an interesting point that the challenge with making a virtual tabletop is Dungeons and Dragons is inherently a creative game. It's a game where you get to kind of use your imagination and sort of make it up as you go along. And one of the most fun things I've ever done as a player is have a DM go, well, shit, I wanted you to turn left and you turned right. And now I got to go figure out what's up. You got to go figure out what's going on over there. Unless you're Bill, and then you just put three elevators there and you kill everybody. Problem solved.
Kill everyone.
Just kill them all. No. But he brought up an interesting point. You have to build a virtual tabletop that's flexible enough for people to still make all their own choices and invent the game as they go along. But you have to have a VTT that kind of comes to a certain point and says, okay, flexibility is still allowed, but let's make it better. Let's make a better virtual tabletop. Where does it stop being a virtual tabletop and start being a video game? right? Where do you take away dungeon master rights, and where do you take away players' right to choose? And you become more like Zork. We only have 3 choices. You can only make one of these 3. There's no 4th option, and if you don't make one of these 3, that's it. But Dungeons and Dragons, the beauty of it has infinite choices, and it doesn't limit you in that perspective. Anytime you try to dig into the virtual tabletop world, and I'm speaking as the chief technology officer of a company who does this kind of thing, that's really hard to give infinite choices inside a piece of software. That's very difficult. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to give you limited choices. That I could do all day. But giving you virtually unlimited options is tough. So maybe, trying to ride that rail of where does it become a video game, where does it stop being a role-playing game is a tough thing to do. I did roll up Brew Talbraid last night. But the point is, and the point he was bringing up, was that they really have struggled with where to make that bridge in between the two. So at least internally, they're having those questions. They're asking the questions of where does VTT stop and video games start? So that's kind of the right question to ask, right? And that's maybe the sort of thing that maybe we could put together a panel at a conference someplace to actually discuss where does it stop being a virtual tabletop and start being a video game? And more importantly, what would we as players want to see inside a virtual tabletop to call it a good one? So bear with me for 1 second. I have a point to this. When I develop a piece of software for a customer at my software company, one of the first things we do is we say, who's going to be using this and how are they going to use it? And we sit down with the users for however long it takes to get their list of requirements of what they want to see in the software. So it would be an interesting panel to put together at a conference, or an interesting kind of group of people to get together to say, hey, look, let's build that requirements list of what we as players would absolutely love to see inside a virtual tabletop. Forget how to build it for a minute. Let's just build the list of features we'd want to see, right? Then deliver that over to Wizards of the Coast. But those are the kinds of questions they're actually asking themselves, and I think those are important questions. But they're doing it on the corporate side, and I don't think they're doing it with enough input from players. And it would be nice to get that player kind of input on those sorts of things before they go develop a new one that nobody likes.
Right. And it's there's been a drive for electronic tools with Dungeons and Dragons, and I've mentioned this before. You go all the way back to Dragon Magazine, and TSR was putting want ads for people who could program the PET, the Apple II, and the Atari 400. Mm-hmm. All the way back as the early 70s. This is not a new thing. There has always been a drive to computerize D&D simply because there are a lot of mundane tasks that are much easier accomplished if you have a computer program to do them. I like rolling dice as much as the next DM, but if this crazy crew on Tuesday decides to go on a 2-week road march, in between sessions, if I've got a good idea of the general direction they're going to take, I'm doing all of the wandering monster checks. So while the encounters are random, they're not thought up right then. I mean, you guys out in the audience, can you imagine me saying, hold on a second, guys, push my monitor back, break out my percentile dice and start rolling and looking and rolling and looking? That would not work. No. And it doesn't work at the table, I don't think, personally, when you've got a group sitting around. It's something, it is a bit of drudge work, if you will, for a DM to do between sessions. And there's certainly something to be said for quickly generating a wandering monster account in a dungeon, but there's even pre-calculated wandering monsters in most, if not all, of the great the great adventure modules back in the day. So having something that can help lift those burdens from the DM so you can concentrate on being pretend elves on graph paper for a few hours is absolutely a wondrous thing, and I embrace it. But I think there is a line. Wizards of the Coast called this a good thing, but I don't consider it a good thing at all. They were showing a demo of their VTT, and there's this row of 3 players Presumably there's a dungeon master somewhere just out of the camera shot, but it's like laptop, tablet, phone. I guess they're showing off everything that this might run on, but they're all sitting at the same table. I never want that. If I'm at the table, the V gets crumpled up and thrown away. We don't need it. And I don't want to see D&D the app, because there's so much baggage that comes with that. I want people to put their phones down and put their tablets down when they're at the table. That's what I want. I want it to be a wholly analog experience. And maybe I'm a relic. Maybe my life lock has turned red and I need to go to carousel. I don't know. But the reality is that Wizards of the Coast has struggled with making a good VTT. In the past, when you had the earliest, well, this wasn't even a VTT, but their character builder software that they said, oh, look at all the features that are coming. It was distributed on a CD-ROM with the first iteration of the Player's Handbook, the third edition Player's Handbook. And then when 4E came in, they said, we're going to do this thing. And they had a crime happened that involved the worst thing possible you can think of that one person could do to another. And then that person did that to themselves. Not Wizards of the Coast fault. Absolutely not Wizards of the Coast fault. But even before that, it was an agonizingly slow development process. And then, of course, they had to set it aside. My fear is not that they don't do it.
Dice required at the table. Sorry.
Dice required at the table. Absolutely. My fear is not that they don't do it good enough. My fear, Tim, is that they do it too good. And
yeah, I mean, there's always that fear, right? And
your tabletop game on my laptop, you're playing Guild Wars, you're playing World of Warcraft, you're playing Diablo 4 at that point.
And there's already massive multiplayer online games people get together and play, and there's a place for that. But as somebody who's about to become a DM again, and I haven't been for years, but I'm about to again. The only computer, if you're at a table playing with friends, I can see the DM with a laptop if you got the virtual books on the laptop. But that's about it, right? Not everybody needs one. No. And so I'd much rather use this kind of thing at the table. If you can see my favorite set of dice,
yes.
Although my kids like this one better, it's a little shinier. But I even have them down to tiny size. It's on my desk here somewhere. Yes, somebody gave me this nice little pendant that looks like a little dragon head, and if you open the dragon head, actually has a complete set of dice inside it. But around a table, you're supposed to be enjoying time with your friends, not enjoying time with your computer. Kind of the point to the game, right? So I think, if I were the DM, I'd be like, okay, you guys don't get any of that stuff. I get it. So I can have all the reference tables. Right. And I think the other thing that sort of stuff might do is, and I've never played with one, but I've heard of people who play with the quote rules lawyer. It's like, oh, if you don't open your book to page 72, paragraph 4, right there. I'm like, oh dear God, you're killing me. It could eliminate that kind of stuff because they're so much easier to find that way. And DMs make mistakes like anybody else, right? You made one last night. You were like, oops. Yeah. And that's fine. It happens because there's just so much in the game that everybody's going to miss one sooner or later. Vroog survived last night. Tarth Noserage died, and I had to roll up a new character called Brew Tallbraid. And for anybody who wants to know how I did it so quickly, there's a very old TSR book called The Rogues Gallery. I cheated in front of
Rogues Gallery, yes. Good book. Darn fine book. But the stats for Gary's character in it are wrong.
Are they?
Really. Gary never showed his character sheets. He never had access to his character sheets. So Brian was making those up based on what he remembered at the table. Mordenkainen's stats are actually given in the module Mordenkainen's Fantastic Adventure, and they are different from the stats in that book. So
I toyed with the idea of pulling one of Gary's characters out just to see if you'd notice, but I figured you would.
I might have caught that. I'm sorry, you're what level now?
Yeah. What I did was I went to the fighters. There's 100 fighters, and I literally got out D20 and I rolled 5 times and I found one that matched the roll. So I sort of pseudo randomly picked one. The first time I rolled, it was a 6th level, and the second time was, I had to find one the right level, but
Right.
it eventually worked out.
That is my only hang up with it is, and because of how bell curves work, you can't really have like, okay, we'll put all the first through X level fighters and all the mid level, because on the average you'll just wind up rolling the ones that are bunched towards the middle anyway. So you kind of got to spread them out. So rolling the dice from a DM's perspective, it's like, okay, I need a 5th level fighter to meet the party. Rolling the dice is just kind of an exercise in difficulty. Just find the 5th level fighter and use him out of that. But so I think, Tim, we're in agreement in that we don't want to see a VTT at the actual tabletop.
I had this notion, and I'm sure half the people that are listening had the same notion. I don't even know how many people are listening tonight. I had this idea that I tease my kids about all the time. Someday I'm going to retire and open a bar that has gaming tables in the back. that doesn't have a set fee to use the gaming tables, but it does have a 2-drink minimum, unless you're the DM, and then there's a 3-drink minimum. Because the DM probably needs a 3rd drink from dealing with the players all night. But I toyed with the idea of doing that. And if I was running a bar like that, I'd be like, okay, nope, paper copy only, right? This is theater of the mind. And that's it. But, that's my little dreamland. And really, it's just an excuse for me to have a place to drink more wine.
Well, if you make it down here to Florida this summer, first round at Gods and Monsters is on me, because I think you'll see your dream location. You may consider relocating to the Sunshine State after you see Gods and Monsters.
I have actually thought about moving to Florida a number of times. My trouble is my kids are in school here. And when my kids asked me why did I want to move to Florida, I was like, well, then I can go to Disney World all the time. And they looked at me like, grow up. I was like, what do I want to grow up for? This
I'm reminded of there's this is likely apocryphal. I want it to be true, but you see this pop up from time to time. It's like a tweet that somebody took a screenshot of, and then they share the screenshot again. But someone was talking to an elderly lady who lived in the neighborhood in Georgia, adjacent to, or a neighborhood. I don't know if it was Georgia, but it was adjacent to a Six Flags, and she bought like a year-round park pass because it's Six Flags and they're inexpensive, but the year-round pass had a meal plan on it, and she said, well, like, this was cheaper than home delivered meals by Kroger or whoever, and I can just walk to an amusement park and have hamburgers or fried chicken sandwiches or whatever anytime I want and have fun. And I have to appreciate that that mindset if it's true, because we had Disney park hopper passes. This was prior to 2010 even, and they were fairly expensive, but not what it is now, because they were gifted to us every year by my wife's parents. And so it just, Saturday, you want to take Charlotte and go to Disney? Sure, let's do that. Scrape together enough to pay for parking, and then just go. And it was like a trip to the mall for us, and we actually enjoyed it. Well, I enjoyed watching the kids.
So I'm going to be there in July with the kids, and we're actually doing both. We're going to Disney and to Universal for a couple of days. So we'll be there July 7th through the 15th, I think.
Yeah,
working from memory there. But it's one of those places that I've taken the kids a couple times, and I think I enjoy it as much as they do. And I know you can wait in line a long time, but it's just one of those places that we enjoy. But you can, honestly, you can wait in line anywhere a whole lot. So, and where else do you get to stand in front of a Millennium Falcon? And I will say this: I'm divorced, but so I can wrap my ex-wife out. They have this ride there called the Tower of Terror that takes you through this sort of
terror.
takes you through this sort of, oh God, what the hell is the name of that show? The Rod Serling thing, Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
So it takes you through this sort of Twilight Zone thing as you go up, and then it drops you in an elevator that just broke and it's about to crash you into the floor. And you get a video of yourself taking the ride, right? So I have a video of my ex-wife hiding behind our son as the doors open and you're about to fall, and I'm like, yeah, you hid behind your child. So, it's not necessarily about the fact that you can wait in line all day. For me, it's more about the fact that I get to go there with my kids and goof off and have fun.
Yeah.
And some of the rides are very long lines. Some of them aren't. It just depends on what you're there to go do. So Universal was fun because honestly, if I had to pick between the two, it's almost a dead heat tie, except for Disney has more park options. Okay, but I will give you two at Universal that, if you've never seen them, are absolutely worth the price of admission, in my opinion. And everybody has to make that mind up for themselves. One is the Harry Potter ride is phenomenal in what it does, technologically speaking, to keep things interesting. The other one with Universal that I thought was fun, and I saw it at Universal in California. I haven't been to the one in Florida. They had this Minion ride. It was like called Minion Madness or something. And if you've seen the Despicable Me movies, the Minion rides, the Minions are just sort of harmless fun. They're really kind of like toddlers. They're just innocent, weird things that sometimes help grew the evil mastermind do evil things. But the Minion Madness was probably the most fun I've had on a ride like ever. It was so much fun.
So that was another place. So Universal Studios is it the main gate used to, they've rearranged it, but the main gate used to be on a thoroughfare called Kirkman Drive, and Kirkman, a little further north on Kirkman, is the college that my wife and I both attended, Valencia College, where we met. And when Universal Studios Florida first opened, there were not a lot of attractions in it, and there was the rides that were there didn't work, so they didn't work reliably. So they didn't charge any. I think I paid $79 for my year-round pass to Universal back in 1990 and or 91, and so did my wife. So between classes, like we had like a 2-hour break between our classes, we would go from the university to the park, have lunch, ride Back to the Future, because that was the only one that consistently worked. We'd ride Back to the Future maybe a couple times, and then head back to campus and do our thing. So it was it was a lot of fun to do that. But Universal is a really cool park. I wish they still had Back to the Future, but it's a Simpsons ride now.
Well, the one I can't wait for this year is they opened a Tron roller coaster at Disney, and I can't wait to see that. It's like a light cycle. You sit down and ride the light cycles on it. So I definitely want to do that. I mean, to find someone who has who has access to the park can get me in. So somebody mentioned, it's Darth Imholt. I got to tell you something. The first time I went there with my kids in 2016 was shortly after they opened. I don't know how shortly, but they had opened the Star Wars part of the parks, right? So this is Luke's lightsaber. So they're actually real-ish. They look real. You hit them and they make sparks and whatnot. My kids at the time got I think Luke. They all got light side. So my kids got Luke, Obi-Wan, and somebody else on the good side. So I was like, I got to get Darth Vader. So I actually have Darth Vader's lightsaber so that I can fight my kids.
There you go. Living in the minute. That's how you do it. So here's a bit of trivia for you, Tim. And this is something I don't think you'd see again, at least for a while. But once upon a time, you could buy Dungeons and Dragons at Disney
Wow.
World. next. So, adjacent to have you been to Disney World before, ever?
Oh, twice. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's called like Downtown Disney or Disney something, but basically,
No,
it is.
yeah.
It's not a theme park. It is mostly shopping. It's like 99% shopping. There's movie theaters and restaurants and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. I know what you're talking about.
So that used to be called Lake Buena Vista, LBV. And it was the shops at Buena Vista, and it was a convenient place to go if you wanted to see the fireworks at the end of the day for Disney, because you can still see out the range over the park where they fire them off and everything. But there was the Village Toy Shop in the middle of LBV, and they sold. They didn't just sell Disney toys; they sold whatever were the popular toys of the moment. I got like 2 sets of Space Legos there when I was a kid, but they actually sold the magenta. I'm not even sure if anyone can see that. Yeah, the magenta and turquoise basic D&D sets there.
Wow.
And that was probably until the mid 80s, but at least until the late 1990s, when West End Games had a license to make the Star Wars role-playing game at Tatooine Traders in the Disney MGM studios. You could buy modules, accessories, rule books, even miniatures for the Star Wars role-playing game that West End put out right there, right as you got off of Star Tours. They had a nice shelf of role-playing game material.
You don't see too much of that kind of stuff anymore. There's a Lego store there now, and mostly it's ludicrously large numbers of restaurants. Last time I was there, which was 2020. Yeah. No, it's 2022, right? Yeah. So I was 26. Yeah, it's 2022. So it huge number of restaurants. And then of course, buy all the stuffed animals and whatever else. It was a Lego shop, cookies, it's as much food as anything else. I think there was a jewelry store there, some other stuff.
Yeah.
I know those shops pretty well. We always hit those whenever we go, and we've been 3 times. I was wrong. We I kind of we fly in. I don't get park tickets for the day we fly in because you're tired from travel. So that we always kind of go hit that and wander around. And my kids, of course, beg for crap from all over the place. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. But yeah, I know that area pretty well. It's a pretty good sushi place over there. And my kids, by the way, all love sushi. Before anybody asks, they're half Korean. They're like, we're raised on the stuff. They'll probably eat types of sushi most adults won't.
I'll eat sushi, but generally like tempura, things like that. Don't really go in. Occasionally, I'll have surimi, but usually it's stuff that is fully cooked. So that was darn interesting. And indeed, Grenadier, one last hit here, Grenadier Miniatures, we've talked about them on the show before. They were the second company to have an official line of advanced Dungeons and Dragons minis. Grenadier made miniatures for Disney. You could buy paint set of Snow White miniatures. It was all 7 dwarves, Snow White, Prince Charming, and the Wicked Witch, and it came with a little brush and a little set of paints, which I'm sure decorated more hotel room walls and car seats than parents would have liked.
Probably. So since you brought up Grenadier, there was another company, Ral Partha, right, that did the similar stuff.
Yes, they were the third company after Grenadier.
I've got a ton of Ral Partha stuff and some of the Grenadier stuff, and for work purposes, okay, it's not really for work purposes. I bought a 3D scanner, and part of me wants to go through and scan all the old Grenadier stuff so I can 3D print it.
Well, you should definitely look at Thingiverse, for example. I have found a lot of Grenadier miniatures that have already been done on Thingiverse.
I've pulled a ton of them off of there. So Bill, you've got 3D printers, and this is getting far afield for everybody, but I've been working with them forever. I've got a multicolor one actually. It's slow, but it'll print multiple colors.
Right.
And 3D printers are very temperamental things. You think dot matrix printers are a pain in the ass? These things are worse. But if anybody ever wants to get into 3D printing, and I tell people this, and you come up with a design you want to do, you're like, oh, I can't print it. Most public libraries now, at least a large number of them, are actually buying 3D printers. And if you email them your STL files, they will print it for you, and they charge you like a couple of pennies a gram. So I had like 20. I got frustrated. I didn't want to print anything out, so I sent it to my local library. Picked it up 2 days later. It cost me like $4. So if you ever want to print out miniatures, anybody who's listening, check to see if your local library has a 3D printer. Overwhelmingly, they do.
Somebody was asking, Iron Wind Metals is now Raul Partha, and Mirliton is about 75 or so. No, I'd say probably a little bit more. Mirliton is a good chunk of Grenadier's fantasy line. Grenadier did miniatures for Traveler. They did miniatures for Lord of the Rings. They did miniatures for Twilight 2000 and had a few other lines, but most of their fantasy minis are not most of their fantasy minis, but rather they have most of the Grenadier fantasy minis, but not some of the other lines that Grenadier did. Now it's interesting. You were mentioning your 3D scanner, which if you lived in closer proximity to me, that I would have to abuse that aspect of our friendship. Just, hey Tim, I bought some more stuff. Here's my Millennium Falcon and my Grenadier Dragon. And anyway, but this is a very interesting, because we've talked about AI on here a little bit, a couple of times before. I've gone blank. Like Blender, the free 3D modeling package Blender, which that's a thing that blows my mind, because when I first got into high-end 16-bit computers, if you didn't want to spend $50,000 in 1989 for a Silicon Graphics Iris, the next best thing was an Amiga when it came to being able to do 3D modeling quickly and in color. But 3D packages on the Amiga were $500 and $600. Now Blender is free. Like you can literally just download Blender, and it knocks Lightwave and Turbo Silver and even newer stuff from the 90s and early 2000s into a cocked hat. But Blender has an AI-based tool built into it, and it's local on your machine. So how long it takes is entirely up to how robust of a machine you have. But if you put your a phone, your DSLR, your webcam, whatever, if it can do continual shot, and you shoot all the angles you possibly can, make sure all those images are going into the same folder on your media, and then load that folder into Blender. Blender will create a 3D model out of all of your shots. And wow. It'll do noise reduction and knock out extraneous background stuff. 3D photogrammetry, I think is called, and I can't wait to try that out.
So, Bill, I'm going to send you one. I can't post in the chat, but I'm going to send you one that because it's a link if you want to send it out to people. 3D scanners used to be just like the price of a small BMW.
Yes.
And somebody posted that they are expensive. They're not cheap, but you can get them for about $700 now. So they're not off the charts crazy, prohibitively, you're about to mortgage the house kind of expensive any longer. They're sub $1,000. And you can actually get some down to about 300. But I looked at a whole bunch of them, and the ones that are actually worth having start around 7. And it used to be where you had to use these lasers to kind of go in and scan everything and figure out exactly where it was and look at the laser returns and everything else. Digital imaging has gotten so good using 3 CCD cameras. You can actually do it with cameras now and a software trick on the other end. So it's about to even get even cheaper because as that software gets a little easier and more prolific, you'll see it come down in price. So yeah, they used to be $5,000, $6,000, $10,000, but you can do it for about $700 now.
Yeah, it is. You know, if you don't want to dick around with your phone and Blender, you can get an all-in-one solution. If that's, you know, if that's a little too rich for your blood and you have a phone that can reliably shoot continuously, there's that. And you know, it's funny you bring up 3D printing. Yes, we're going to talk about 3D printing for a minute, guys. Just be calm. And the price reduction. I mean, I've got my poor little Mega Zero 2.0 that needs some TLC, and I need to get it working again. I got it Christmas a few years ago for, I think it was shipped $189.
They are not expensive. They're not expensive anymore.
What even that not great printer can do knocks a printer from 5 years prior to that into a cocked hat. It is so much feature rich. I have 3 out there in the office beyond. I have 3 resin printers, 2 of which I bought, neither one of which cost more than $200. And they're doing stuff that, again, in 2015, 2016, was the province of multi-$1,000
big industrial guys.
Yeah, rapid prototypers.
Yeah. And this is what people. So let me take my goofy weird hat off and put my chief technology officer hat on. Yeah, because I work with AI every day. I work with a field called predictive analytics, which I could explain, but everybody would fall asleep. And everybody looks at AI, and I work intimately with AI. That came out bad. I work closely with AI on a regular basis. And I know it pretty well. And I've got friends all over the valley, and I worked at MIT forever. So I've seen what's coming down the pipeline in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And I see this all the time when it comes to AI. Well, yeah, but it's not this. Well, it's not that. It's not this other thing. Especially when it comes to art and ChatGPT and that kind of stuff. And I don't want to get into the debate on art or not art at this point in time, because it's not one we're going to solve here. But if you look at all the other AI stuff that is being done outside of generative AI, which is art, movies, and ChatGPT kind of stuff, think about where we were 3 years ago, and then think about where we are today. And now think about where we're going to be at a year, 18 months, 24 months from now. What's that difference going to be? Because one of the things that has happened when it comes to technology coming in and overtaking things, and I've been worked in technology for 20 plus years. I've been around it since, we won't discuss when, but it was the TRS-80 Model 1, if that tells you how long. Technology is changing faster and faster and faster all the time. So when you hear about things like, oh, AI is going to come in and take jobs, and we worried about writers and artists and other stuff, you're looking in the wrong place, because it's going to come in and take jobs much sooner than you think in other places. And how quickly? Really, really fast. So other technological shifts happened over years or decades. This one's Jon Stewart made a joke. He's like, this one's going to be ready on Thursday. And he's not far off from that. Yeah. So it is going to change a lot of things very quickly. And technology is just like that. So like with 3D printers, like you were saying, what you could do for $200 in a $200 printer today would have been the province of a company you would have had to hire and pay them $50,000 to say hello, to get access to their printer just 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago. What's $200 going to do by Christmas this year? Right, when it comes to 3D printing, because I've got a couple of them, and the 3D printers, like the ones you've got, and the 3D printers that I have, if you try to print fast, they're not going to work. But if you print slowly, if you don't care about speed, you can do some really good detail work, especially if you slow the print speed way down. You can get features that are like 1/10 of a millimeter or something out of a $400 printer. It's incredible just how tiny this stuff can get. Especially if you're going slow. And I will tell you, the devil in 3D printers is if you try to go fast, that's it's going to jack up the print every time. You got to go slow, or it just doesn't work. So
Yeah. And well, I mean, in resin printing, you're talking about layer sizes in microns, like
Yeah, it's like tenth of a it's like a micron.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff comes out. But I've said before on the show, Tim, and I think this is very true. When you print with filament, the hobby is robotics. The byproduct is 3D prints. When you print in resin, the hobby is creating toxic waste. The byproduct. Phenolic resin is very bad, very, very bad stuff.
Hey, I had to go to my boss one day when I still worked at the university and said, "Hey, I need to order a bunch of plutonium." So I've worked with some really weird stuff before.
Yeah.
I actually asked him just like that, just to see the look on his face too. I thought it was funny.
When I was in middle school, we had I took ceramics. I always took the soft stuff to avoid having to do any mental heavy lifting. But our ceramics coach, our ceramics teacher, girls softball coach, Michael Alone, Mike, he had a guy come in and talk to us, a friend of his who did ceramics, and he talked about he was doing yellow glazes, and you get a nice, rich, vibrant yellow glaze with uranium. And he was living, I think he said, is out in California, and he was like, well, I have such a bull order on this, and instead of just ordering this stuff over and over, I'm just going to order a pound of uranium, a powdered uranium from this chemical company. And, a 1981 Chevy Malibu sedan pulls up in his driveway like 2 days later. A couple of people in cheap wool suits get out, and they're like, can we talk to you for a few minutes, sir? Well, so he did get a visit from the FBI for ordering a pound of uranium.
So I'm going to send you one. Let's show this picture to people.
Okay.
Uranium does a lot of things, and there's different kinds of uranium. Some you can build bombs out of, some you can't. We all saw Oppenheimer. But it used to be used for all kinds of stuff. And you could throw that picture up for a minute.
Yes.
It used to be used for decorative purposes. This is what's called uranium glass. People actually used to put it in glassware because when you turn the lights off, it looked pretty.
Yeah.
Some crazy people actually used to drink out of it too. And they say it's okay, but So that's actually uranium glass that people would actually have in their home for, shot glasses and wine glasses and serving dishes. Nobody in their right mind would actually use that to eat off of.
Well, that was the big thing in the 50s too. Was you remember the brightly colored solid like blue, yellow, and red and green Fiesta ware. You remember Fiesta ware, right, Tim? Yeah, the yellow Fiesta ware.
Yeah, my mother used to collect milk glass. It was like this weird white glass that.
Yeah, that was Fiesta ware. But I can honestly say I never saw glass that glowed like something out of an episode of Fallout. So.
I have seen them in a museum. I've never actually held one, nor would I. Because I understand the radiation stuff, but I've been in enough labs and I've probably been exposed to my lifetime supply already. So I'm out.
I've got a chunk of an A10 slug around here. It's sealed in a jar, but I do have some depleted uranium around here. But I keep it I keep it nice and secure.
If anybody's curious, last time I was on, I mentioned I used to work in ballistic glass and design bulletproof stuff for the Army. And one of the nicest moments of my career was somebody looked me up and gave me this chunk of metal. And when I asked him, I was like, what the hell are you giving me this for? What do I want it for? He's like, well, it's a piece of 155 millimeter howitzer shell and a piece of glass you designed. When I was looking out the window of his MRAP, this got caught right at eye level when an IED went off. He's like, if the glass hadn't been there, it would have gone straight through his head. So that's an actual piece of an Iraqi IED. So,
yikes.
Anyway.
And by the way, YouTube, in case you're listening, in Minecraft.
You
got to put that in there. You got to love old dictionaries and scientific journals and stuff like that. Vaughn says he's got one that defines uranium as a worthless white metal. Always a lot of fun.
I have a set of Encyclopedia Britannicas in the other room that has all the kinds of weird sayings like that. It actually refers to Oklahoma as a territory because it wasn't a state yet. but it was pretty old.
One of my wife and I's favorite movies is White Christmas with Danny Kaye and Bing Crosby, Rosemary Clooney, and I forget the other actress's name. I'm so sorry. Vera Lynn. I think it was Vera somebody or the other. Anyway, but yeah, they referenced the Alaska Territory. I mean, the movie is set in current day, or then current day in the 1950s. But yeah, so and so is out of the country in Alaska. He won't be back until such and such month. So, Dave Synth is absolutely disgusted with WotC. Dave, my heart is with you, brother. But listen, let not your heart be troubled. They are doing enough damage to themselves. I completely understand. Is see-through aluminum glass still as expensive as all get? I heard about actual transparent aluminum. Tim, what's the skinny lately on transparent aluminum?
I mean,
it's a thing. I've seen samples of it. It's actually there. I just didn't know you had.
You can do all kinds of. I did see that Indian Joe. Thank you. You can find all kinds of interesting things to do with that. The trouble is, so like I used to work when I was at MIT, I worked at one of the research institutes that Department of Physics owned part of, called the Institute for Soldier Nanotechnology. So I worked with nanotech a lot, and particularly these things called carbon nanotubes. And everybody's like, oh, we'll just do this with carbon nanotubes because they're lighter than aluminum and stronger than steel. And you can build, transparent aluminum. You can do all this other stuff using all these micro or nano materials. And you can. Do you have $1 million a square foot?
There you go. So
therein lies the problem. I don't know about aluminum, how much it costs to do actual transparent aluminum now. I've been out of that for a while, but when I was working in nanotubes with carbon nanotubes, and this was I checked the prices not that long ago. They were still measured in hundreds to thousands of dollars per gram. So why don't you just go build a tank out of this stuff that's lighter than aluminum and 50 times stronger than steel? Well, because it's a couple of $1,000s a gram. Yeah. They're not going to do that.
A single tank would cost you as much as an aircraft carrier.
Yeah, I mean, magnesium, you're right. It's not aluminum. It's an aluminum compound, right? But most materials these days are compounds of different things. So like when I was working on bulletproof glass, it's not really glass. And the glass itself, if you even have glass in it, usually sometimes it's tempered glass, the glass is not what does the work to stop the bullet. It's not it at all. It's the laminate layers in between that do all the work. But so glass, or is it just sort of aluminum that's sort of transparent that's got a bunch of other crap in it too? So it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah, and it's funny. We tend to think of tanks, big, great armored beasts with inches and sometimes feet of armor. The Russians. We can talk about top-down attack munitions and stacked IEDs and drones hitting engine decks and dropping down open hatches and bad tank doctrine until the war in Ukraine ends. But one of the interesting things is the Russians, starting with their T-72 builds, and this is yesterday I found out, yes, we're going on an even worse tangent than we did before, so buckle up, guys.
No, because I'm about to try to start an expedition to the Barrier Peaks. So,
in the 70s, during one of the Arab-Israeli wars, I think it was 73, four M48s were captured by Syria and given. A couple were given to the Russians, and they contained our brand newest Sabo rounds. And so apparently the Russians, when they got these brand spanking new 105 millimeter Sabo rounds, they had a fit because they were punching through their then standard T-62s like nobody's business. So they very, very, very quickly got up on a new program for an upgraded T-72. They had already started building the T-72 as a moderate upgrade, the T-72M, and then they said this is not going to cut it. This M48, which is a 1950s era tank, now has a gun on it that could punch through our brand newest tanks. So they started using something called Texolite, which is, believe it or not, it is a layer under the steel in Russian tanks, and they still use it today. But Texolite is fiberglass. It is a fiberglass and silicate compound, composite armor. And when the Israelis fought those T-72s, their Sabo rounds did not punch through, and we did not have anything of the 105 millimeter flavor that could do it. I caught a video of, if you guys know Sophie Line over on YouTube. She's a young lady. She has an absolutely amazing channel. They talked to a guy who was a crewman and commander of M48s, M60A3 Rise, and M1 tanks. And literally, we think of the M1 as being a badass tank. It is a badass tank. They could not defeat T-72s in the frontal arc. In the Cold War, the doctrine was soak them in and shoot them from the sides and flanks, because our 105s could not defeat T-72.
So I sent you a picture in Discord and a YouTube link. So since we're on this weird tangent anyway, and I'm about to start doing Expedition to Barrier Peaks, we got to talk about high tech for a minute.
Okay.
So the picture, if you want to throw that up for people, since we're on this weird tangent, is a Russian tank using what's called reactive armor.
Which is cool on its own.
It depends on how you look at it. So if it really does. So a lot of sometimes, not always, but sometimes you will see troops dismounted walking next to a tank to do things. But also you'll find that on a tank, the thinnest armor is on top. So what you'll see in this picture is what's called reactive armor. What reactive armor does is it waits for it to be hit, and then it sends an explosive force out to kind of counter the energy of the incoming force. And that works out really well, unless you're walking right next to the tank, in which case you pretty much are going to die. So you see these little explosive packages on the side that are not.
Yeah, really I'm gonna get this up here in just a second.
And if you look carefully, they know where their thinnest armor is, because they have to put these reactive kits all over the thinnest parts of it, because these tanks are really rock solid from the sides, and you can see the angle armor helps with that, and all kinds of other stuff. And this is not, I'm not divulging any big secrets here, because this stuff's been around since World War I, but and even since people were fighting with real swords and armor. If you make something flat, it's very easy to penetrate, because I know exactly how to do it. If you make something curved, it's got a lot more strength to it and things to deflect off to the sides instead of try to penetrate straight through. So you see the weakest parts of it there have all this reactive stuff all over it, and the parts that are tougher to get through don't. Well, there you go. That's why. And the video, if you so that actually protected it from a bunch of our stuff. And what you find is, if you watch videos of our missiles, our anti-tank missiles coming in, they come up and over a tank, and then they drop straight down and hit the top and cause the whole thing to just go kaboom. And the A-10 Warthog, if the A-10 comes across, just destroys the tank and turns it into Swiss cheese, because they're just badass airplanes. Now the video, it was actually a project I worked on. And then I'll get off of the armor subject, but this was probably one of the more fun things I ever got to work on in my career. So Bill, can you throw that video up?
Yeah, am I going to get copyright struck for it?
It's on YouTube.
So's Led Zeppelin's catalog. I can't.
Yeah, you're not going to get copyright struck for this.
Okay, hang on a second.
This does not have music, and it's just a video. It's a defense project I work on. What this is when we went into Iraq and Afghanistan, we had an issue with rocket propelled grenades on certain vehicles, because rocket propelled grenades are really hard to stop. I mean, really, really, really hard to stop. So we were looking for any which way you could to stop an RPG. And this other program I worked on, which was called Quick Kill, was in collaboration with Raytheon when I was over there. It was designed to stop rocket propelled grenades with sort of a Patriot-like capability. So the rocket propelled grenade is coming in at the bottom. Pause it if you can. Yeah, so that's the RPG sort of in the center of the screen. That thing popping up sort of 2/3 of the way in from a third of the way in from the left is the counter missile. So we're going to shoot it down with a missile instead of having it try to hit our vehicle, and the simulated vehicle is right there. So go ahead and push play. There comes our countermeasure. Boom, we knocked out the RPG. It's a very messy system. So you can see it up close. The Army posted this, not me. So, we're not in trouble for showing any secrets because the Army put it up and that's their problem.
Oh, okay.
So this is all on YouTube. Now watch it in real time. That's how quick it works in real time. It just boom and it's done, right? The trouble with modern armor versus in the game we all play and love is armor has to work instantaneously when you need it. Reactive armor, get my shield up. You have a few seconds. You don't have time anymore, right? So you have to use sensors to see that stuff coming in. You got microseconds to respond. And that stuff happens so fast. Like the guy shooting the RPG barely has time to get his finger off the trigger before the RPG is knocked out of the air. That's how fast they move. The Army did not ultimately field that answer. They didn't like it. Because we actually shot 2 missiles. One shot down the RPG and the second went back to shoot down the guy that fired the RPG. And you're apparently not allowed to shoot people with automated systems. So
yeah, it's as another guy here, the fat electrician says, it's not a war crime the first time, however, subsequent.
Yeah, that orbital area, you're right. On the Striker vehicles, that was solved with slat armor.
Yeah.
It was a lot cheaper, but this would work on Humvees, and you couldn't put that much weight on a Humvee.
Yeah. So anyway, there we go. There's your. We're gonna play Twilight 2000 one of these days on stream, so just consider that a taste.
So, since you got audience on, I don't know how many people are still on, but because we kind of rushed there.
30 people watching, man.
I am actually, since I started playing D&D with your group, I'm actually about to start DMing a group to run through something, but I'm not doing it once a week. Mine is every other week on Sunday evenings. I'm doing twice a month on Sunday nights, and I think we should get Bill to come in and be a player and live stream it to my channel so we can have Bill playing instead of DMing and run him through Expedition to Barrier Peaks and see if Bill survives.
Hey, only if I can use something out of Rogue's Gallery, right?
Use whatever you want, man, as long as it's not of deities and demigods. It's fine.
You don't want me to run Amaritsu through it?
No.
You directed at her by any creature in the universe.
That's right.
Well, I will gladly accept your offer. I may have to make some adjustments to some IRL schedules, but I will openly accept that offer to play in some Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. That is a fun module. And if you guys haven't seen it, if you search my channel, my channel is organized like a comic store downtown. It's like, are these in any kind of order? Yeah, you just got to know what to look for. Don't bother me, as I'm sitting over behind the counter, reading heavy metal or something. But we actually have done a deep dive of the module, and I don't metagame, Tim. Don't worry about it. You could run me through Keep on the Borderlands, and I'd play it straight. But Paul Stormberg did a deep dive on the history and the nature of S3 with us, and it was absolutely fascinating. And if you guys haven't seen it, check my channel out and look at just look Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, and you'll find where I did the interview with Paul, and he talked about the history of it and what that spaceship in the Barrier Peaks actually is. So we had a lot of fun talking.
So one of the reasons I want to have you in on the game is because I haven't DM'd in like 15 years. Right? So having an experienced DM as a player is kind of cool, because you can have somebody go, "Psst, you forgot, roll for initiative."
Well, so that can be both a blessing and a curse. They say doctors are the worst patients. Yeah. But I was at Gary Con last year, I hunted down Alan Hammock, and I was watching him run his players through, of course, Ghost Tower of Inverness. And Alan is a great guy, and that is a fun module. And we were sitting there, and he had a player, like, there's a reverse gravity room, and a player fell from the floor to the ceiling, and another one had a ring of fire resistance, but he fell into a sea of fire in the same room. And I'm watching him play, and Alan was kind enough to let Colleen and I just kind of sit and kibitz. And I spoke up and I said, Alan, far be it from me, because you're the DM, but shouldn't his equipment save versus crushing blow if he's fallen 30 feet to the floor? And he was like, just the groans from everyone in the room. And I was like, and the fellow who fell in the fire, shouldn't his equipment be saving throws versus magic fire for all of his gear? And he said, well, it's a convention game, so I'll be a little bit more generous. But people were like, oh, Bill, please don't do this to us. But since I'm actually going to be playing, rest assured, saves versus crushing blows or magical fire, I will forget to remind you of.
So Vaughn has a good question. How do you play a module that you know inside out? And I think part of it, I'll let you answer, but the way I do it, the way I would do it personally, because I've run the Dragonlance stuff a couple times, is first off, the dice giveth and the dice taketh away. So there's always some random nature to the whole thing. Random encounters always make a difference. Party decisions make a difference. The DM setting up just a random encounter for fun, right? So when you run a module, at least when I run a module, the module's a guideline, but there's always those extra little tidbits I throw in just to mess with people as a DM. So I'll let you answer how you do it as a player, but as a DM, you never run a module the same way. I would never run a module the same way twice.
Right. And I have to tell you now, I'm just gonna state this flat out. There's a Froghemoth in the sort of park. It is in S3. Froghemoth is approaching, if not surpassing, Storm Giant or Titan number of hit dice. It gets like 8 attacks. It can basically be a TPK. I know it's there as a person. I don't know what the dice will do if Tim unleashes it. He may not. He may put something completely different there. He may remove it from the module completely now that he knows that I know it's there, or he might stuff it in another area where there's nothing because there's lots of open space in the module. Maybe the Froggy Winnicorton, who knows? So I don't know what Tim's going to do with it or about it, but if I do know it's there, and if it's there, I still can't control what it can potentially do it. Hey, Kabuki. I know it's there. Tim knows it's there. Okay. Bill may not be surprised when we roll surprise. Bill's character might suffer total surprise for 4 segments and be attacked 4 times by the Froghemoth, and 5 to 25 damage per attack is, that it could literally, like, okay, with a great slooshing of water, this frog-like creature hops out of the pond, rolls a d6. You guys are surprised for 4 rounds. It reaches out, it grasps Sir Robert, and makes 1, 2, 3, 4 successful attacks. Does 25, 25, 25, 25. Bill, it rips you from limb to limb and literally just dismembers you.
Please roll a new character.
Yeah, roll a new character. I can know that it's there. I can't control the actions. Do you know how many times I've played Doom? I mean, the original Doom. I know where creatures are. I can optimize my ammunition use. What I can't control is exactly precisely how they're going to behave as I play, and exactly precisely how much damage I'm going to take from an imp fireball, or from a revenant missile, or from a bite from a specter in that game. Every playthrough is going to be marginally different, and the fun comes in seeing how those set pieces are going to play out. I mean, I've talked before about my great love of college football. There are 3 YouTubers who have put together every game very nearly in the modern era, and even some going back into the 1940s that the Alabama Crimson Tide have played, and they're up on YouTube. I know Alabama won the national championship game in 2015. I know how they won it. I can close my eyes and picture some of the key plays. I still enjoy watching it. So as a player, I mean, how many of you guys will watch Star Wars or Blade Runner or Shane or The Pelican Brief over and over again? You still laugh at the comedies, you still thrill at the thrillers, you're still scared by the horror movies that you've seen over and over again. And with a module, it's even more so because the dice will tell a different story. I mean, the Froghemoth that's dismembered 10 characters on my 11th playthrough might miss all 4 times, and each subsequent round miss all 4 times. And then I've got a story about how I waded in with my 2-handed sword, and the gods were with me, and I chopped the thing into frog legs, and that's how I won. So that is it.
And it's a module for characters 8 through 12.
Yes.
And it's not for like 2, right? If you don't go through that thing with a party of at least 6 or 7, you ain't coming out the other end alive.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not just about Bill making the right choice. It's about all the characters making the right choices and all the characters getting the right dice roll, or you may not survive, because that's not a module for the weak of heart. That's for 8 to 12 and 6 or 7, I forget how many it recommends, but it's like 6 or 7 people.
Yeah.
So it's not for the weak of heart. It's not when you just grab a new player and go, hey, let's go do this. Because as last night I stupidly poked the owlbear, weird things can happen at weird times, right? You have to be able to react appropriately.
Literally last week, the party faced down over 100, I keep wanting to say bugbears, hobgoblins, and they had area effect, they had time on target strikes from Rings of Shooting Stars and Wands of Fireballs and sleep spells. I had plans for that cohort of hobgoblins. Just like that. The ogres, I thought, okay, well, the ogres are gonna just like that. 3 owl bears. Well, we'll deal with the 3 owl bears, and then we'll do some role play in town. 3 owl bears. We were that close to a total party kill last night, girls. I have told this story before. I sent, I had a 3rd level party in my Castle Greyhawk, stumble into a bunch of cultists who stupidly caused a type 5 demon, a Balrog, to appear in their midst. My wife was playing a paladin. It could hedge things out. They dealt with it. Same night, same characters, full up hit points, on their way out of the dungeon. There were 5 of them. They were jumped by 14 giant rats. One conscious character dragged the badly wounded remnants of the party out of the dungeon after the encounter with the giant rats. The dice tell a story that the players don't expect, even if you know what the generalities of the adventure are. And that is how you get enjoyment time after time after time after time. Everybody knows the Sphere of Annihilation is in the Green Devil face mouth in the Tomb of Horrors, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what is the 4-armed gargoyle going to do? Is the party going to finally realize how to deal with the siren and get her to at least accompany them peacefully?
And will the dice roll allow that?
And will the dice roll allow that? Exactly. People keep playing the Tomb of Horrors over and over again. An Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. So knowing that it's there, it's like Jessica said to Paul in Dune, knowing that a trap is, or the first step of avoiding a trap is knowing that it's there. But that's all I can do. I can't affect the influence of the dice. Sorry, Tim, over to you.
No, that was pretty much what I was saying. I've played the game Rise and Decline of the Third Reich a couple of hundred times. Because my dad and I used to play it all the time when I was a kid. I played it with my kids, and it's a fantastic Avalon Hill war game. Scenario is the same. Doesn't stop me from playing it. It means I've got to use a different strategy as a DM. Bill might see something. Yes, he knows where the trap is, but as a DM, can I add other flavor to that? Great, get rid of the trap. However, oh, by the way, here comes 5 giant ants just for fun. That happened to come out of the galley because the galley left food out overnight or whatever the case is, right? So the trap is there, but can you disarm it under fire?
Yeah.
So
and those wandering I have met so many DMs who are like, I don't roll wandering monsters. They don't. Why would giant ants be crawling unmolested through the orc lair and blah 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 blah? Wandering monsters change that whole dynamic of I have played Keep on the Borderlands since it came out in 1980. I know all the ins and outs of this module, but were you expecting a group of 1 to 4 whites to be hanging out with the kobolds? Because it can happen.
It happens. Weird things come along. But yeah, I think that's how I handle it. Because like I just finished reading a book. Like just sometimes to take the same example of reading a book. I've read this book called Lucifer's Hammer 4 times now. And it I still enjoy it, and I probably still see things in it that I didn't see before. And part of that comes because I was doing some deep dives, and I was talking to people about the book, and they saw certain things in it that I didn't see. And I wanted to read it again. I'm like, how the hell did you see that in there? And I read it again. I'm like, okay, I still don't see that. So you go back and talk to that person and kind of get some more input. And it's that kind of thing where, maybe it's something you played before, but maybe you learn more now. You go a deeper layer. You understand it a little bit better, or you find a new facet of something that you didn't see before. And Bill plays a lot of these things and goes through them a lot, and a lot of players do. But do you remember every little tiny detail of it from the last time you read through that module? Or is it kind of a weird blur of the 50 modules that you've read since then?
Exactly. There are going to be little details I don't remember. Jorge, absolutely nothing. And good evening to you, sir. But yeah, I mean, and you again as DM, it's a freaking spaceship from not just another world, but another dimension that is on Greyhawk. You may decide that that empty room has got like 2 police androids just waiting for somebody to force the door and open fire on them. That may be your thing. So it's up to the DM to change stuff around. So it's really not a matter of how do you not metagame, because honestly, I think the only way you can metagame as an honest player is if the DM laid the module down and read every line of every encounter, including stuff outside box text, if the module has box text descriptions, and told you what was coming next.
You never know. I could put a Dalek in it, right from Doctor Who.
You could put a Dalek in it. I mean, who's to say that the crew of that ship didn't stop on a planet and pick up a Dalek? You could put a xenomorph in it. It's like, why do we keep finding all these skeletons with broken open rib cages? What's that about?
Weird things can come along.
Stuff can just jump out at you.
Yeah.
Vaughn says basically the best way to defeat metagaming is for the DM to customize the module. That, and again, the dice will tell that story that you don't know about. And fair play. Okay, I mean, like if I don't know if Kabuki hadn't seen Blade Runner, and she was over at my domicile and watch it, or even if she said, I'm going to watch Blade Runner, I'm not going to say, oh, cool, you're going to watch Blade Runner. Okay, so right at the beginning, Rick Deckard gets into, a fight with Zora, and then actually it's Rachel who shoots Zora, and it's blah 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 blah. That is kind of meta. So you don't, as a good player, you don't do that to yourself. You just kind of take a deep breath and take a step back and just enjoy each scene as it unfolds. And I agree with Kyle. I agree with you about never using modules at all. Look, personally, I think that like some of Gary's best work outside of the rule books is in these modules. And I'm just going to say it. I think you do yourself a disservice if you don't play through like Against the Giants, Keep on the Borderlands, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, Tomb of Horrors at least once in your life as a DM or as a player, because there's great stuff in there.
And personally, the reason I do it, I know everybody wants to make up their own adventures, is if you want to do that, that's great. More power to you if you got the time for it. I have a full-time job, 3 kids. I'm a single dad. I write books. I run a YouTube channel. I run a Twitter. I mean, I'm busy. Got stuff to do. And these are well thought out. And not only that, they're play tested, right? So if you come up with an adventure on your own, it's never been play tested, and maybe somebody can come along and break it. And I'm not saying that would happen, but maybe it will, right? These have been tested by people before they ever hit the streets. So kind of the kinks have been worked out. And to me, when I sit down to play a game, I'm sitting down to enjoy myself and relax. And creating a whole module to do that, well, that's great for some people to do. I don't want to do it. I just want to sit down and play. So maybe that's lazy on my part, but I when I'm goofing off finally, outside of work, that's what I want to do, is just goof off. Because I don't get enough time off as it is.
Yeah. I mean, modules are they're just great for that, as is a campaign. Look, I would love to be 15 and have nothing but spare time to make my own campaign world. I keep talking about my version of Castle Greyhawk. It's people are like, "Ooh, when would that ever get published, Bill?" Obviously you couldn't call it Greyhawk, but never, because it's all up here. I don't have time to write down 10 levels worth of it. That's thousands of encounters. That's that's all that fine detail mapping. I know what it looks like in my head, and I can run the first 3 levels just straight from memory for people, and to need some of the more memorable stuff on other levels, but the time just is not there. So I say, do the equivalent of putting on physical graffiti. Maybe you're a guitarist and maybe you can really lay down some great licks, but there are times when you just want to put on physical graffiti, or Frampton Comes Alive, or Sandinista by the Clash, whatever. You just want something pre-made, something to enjoy. And that is the spot that modules fill it.
Since you brought up guitar players, and I am a guitar player, but there is a Reddit thread that you've got to share with people if they've never seen it. It is absolutely worth looking at once, and even twice if you find it funny. So I will leave this to you so you can share it. Even though it circulates Twitter on occasion, it's still funny. Because no matter how famous you are, no matter how successful you are, no matter what else goes on, your family still looks at you like you're the dork that can't remember to put his clothes away.
All right, I don't see a link.
I put it in the private chat. I can throw it on Discord if it helps.
Let me see. Okay, there it is. Yeah, I got it now.
I brought this one up today because my daughter was picking on me for something, and at work, some people tell me, "Oh, it's everybody," because you run the company, people suck up to you. But then my daughter comes home and treats me like an 11-year-old girl would treat her dad. So if you see that, that's you just want to play guitar, but your dad happens to be the guitar player from Pink Floyd and won't leave you alone. I'll try and learn how to play guitar.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. And I think that's I think that's a danger with anything. Like, if either of my daughters sat down and said, yeah, I want to get down with D&D and I want to create some of my own adventures, Dad, I'd be like, cool. You want the old man to help you out?
So I know we're kind of coming up on 2 hours here, but everybody grows up thinking their dad knows everything and can do everything, but he's still that dork, right? I will never forget the day I discovered mine was human. I was in college finally. I'd gotten out of the Army and I went back to school, and I got stuck on. I lived close enough to Dad that I could kind of go visit him if I had to when I was an undergrad. And I got stuck on a math problem. Dad was a software engineer. He was really good at math. So take it to Dad. I finally got to like calculus. No, it's differential equations. I got past Calc 3 into DiffEq. Took it home to my dad. He looks and goes, "What the fuck are you asking me for? Get out of here." It's like, I have no idea. It's like, go away. It's like, finally passed Dad. Sweet. Oh, wait. I still have to solve the problem. Crap.
Oh, don't let the little bastard's generation gap you.
I got an A in the class finally, but it was funny. And what was really funny about that is I later wound up publishing a paper on the thing I was struggling with, so it worked out. So, if you ever want to, and I'll tell a funny physics story because I don't want to get too deep into role playing again because we'd be here for another hour and a half. And everybody, when you're a physicist or you're a scientist for a living, you get a couple of weird reactions from people, unless you're right next to MIT's campus or right next to Stanford's campus or something, and then people kind of expect it. But I live in Frisco, Texas, a mile away from the Dallas Cowboys practice field. People don't expect to run into a physicist around here. So people are like, "Oh, you're a physicist." And I always get like one of just a number of reactions. One is, "Well, you don't act like a physicist." And my first question is, "Really? How many of them have you met?" And the answer is always 0. It's like, so what do you think a physicist acts like? We're not all Sheldon, although I have met a few that are pretty close. But the other one is they always have some question about some esoteric little part of physics that I have no idea how to answer the question in a way that doesn't involve really advanced mathematics that nobody understands but goofy scientists. So I always kind of fake an answer that sort of makes sense. But the third one that I find absolutely hilarious is people want to get me to confirm their conspiracy theories. It's like, well, as a scientist, you should know that quantum teleportation works, and we're actually already transporting people to Mars. We have colonies there. It'll be revealed before the next election. That was real. Somebody actually wanted me to confirm that.
Oh my
and
God.
Kept at me for 15 minutes. And the more I denied it, the more they were just absolutely convinced I was in on the deal. And I'm like, I was in a bar too. So I was like, scotch, like 2.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Quickly.
And it's not, trust me, I am not like playing nerd equivalencies with you, Tim, but I've had the same thing. Well, you knew Gary Gygax, so maybe you can confirm this for me. Insane thing that they think that Gary said or did or has to do with him.
He summoned demons, and the demons helped him write the whole thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Didn't Gygax have like a room that was just for black magic in the TSR offices? No, they had a bunch of science fiction books and some encyclopedias and dictionaries that they bought from the Lake County School District when they were outdated. That was what TSR had at first. No. I mean, I talked to a guy whose uncle knew a guy who worked at TSR, and he told me about the black magic. I'm like, no. So I feel you. completely different intensity, because you have to deal with actual foil hat crazy people, and I guess this is just a different thing. But I completely feel you.
So the other one that I think is absolutely hilarious is people find out I'm a tech founder, and they're like, "Oh, great!" And they all instantly think we're like, Bill Gates or Elon Musk, and like I just $1,000 bills come dropping out of our pockets randomly, right? So the number of people that show up like, oh, can you put $250,000 in my company? I'm like, can I take a look at your business plan and maybe I can call some people and help you raise some money? We don't really have a plan, but we need about 250 grand. I was like, by when? Like, oh, next Friday. Like, good luck.
But then what I'm picking up here is you're not about to do an angel investment for the Delvers Dungeon. That's fine.
You got to put together a business plan, man. You put together a business plan, I'll pitch it.
This is the business plan.
I've gotten companies funded before, but you need a plan, and you need sales projections, and you got to have all that stuff. ROI projection.
Oh my gosh. Well, anyway, listen, thank you for coming out and doing some heavy lifting. Kyle, of course, it was able to pop in the audience there at the end. And Kyle, I hope things have calmed down a little bit for you, and have a wonderful Shabbat. And I think we're going to get out of here. My apologies to the Black Crows. I'm sorry we ran out of time. Maybe we can get you guys on the next show. We just ran out of time. That happens. But,
and if anybody has a connection to Drew Barrymore, I've been trying to get a dinner date forever. So her and I are the same age. We're both single right now. I think, now's my chance, right?
I'll call some people.
All right, you call some people.
All right. So I will be back tomorrow night. You got to watch, Tim. We're gonna have Heidi Gygax and Eric Garland on here from Gaxland. They're gonna be talking about this stuff. So
I actually think I have time tomorrow. I want to see that.
There you go. You should check it out. Exactly. Robert Phillips knows what I need the money for. I need 20 square feet more of studio space. But anyway, thank you again, Tim. Thank you to our audience. Listen, Vaughn, buddy, my heart goes out to you. I know how that is. And when you're ready, man, adopt. To anyone out there who's considering a pet, adopt. But thank you, everybody. Does this visit give Tim the pass on the next death? No. Although he did help out. Maybe I'll fudge a die roll.
No. Next time, if the magic user doesn't cast the fireball, he and I are going to have a little fight. I wanted him to cast fireball. He wouldn't do it.
That's between you and Thane. All right, guys. I'm gonna slide Tim on out of here, and I am going to wrap it up this evening. And of course, the lesson that you should all take away from this and Tim's stories of woe and such like and so on is that whatever you do, beware the owl bears. Peace to you all. Love you. See you tomorrow night. Heidi Gygax, Eric Garland.
Have you seen my owl bear? Here's to all the weirdos everywhere in the woods and in the air. Have you seen my owl bear? Should I shave off all my hair? Bobs are all around. Some live in tunnels underground. Some are fat, some are rich, some are sleeping in a ditch. Can you ride a crooked horse without a saddle way off course? Naked as a toad, all the way to Smoky Joe's. Have you seen the little creep driving fast in his little green Jeep? He smells like fish and brandy, but his rotten teeth look dandy. Take me to the show, I don't care if fast or slow. From action flicks to dancing dicks, just take